Hey, so welcome to uh, another JavaScript data structures and algorithms tutorial. And this session, we're going to take a look at the return largest numbers in arrays challenge in free code camp. So just to explain this challenge a little bit, so we're going to start with a function called largest of 4, and this function is going to take an array as a parameter. So here's an um, example array here. So the interesting thing with this array is it's actually an array of arrays, right? So you've got the square brackets here for the outer array, and then there's multiple inner arrays here inside that array. Okay, you've got an array. So you've got arrays of integers like this one here, and there's what, 4 arrays of integers, and they're all contained within one outer array. Okay, so this array that's being passed into the function is actually an array of arrays. Okay, and the challenge in this case is we want to go through each of those inner arrays or sub arrays, whatever you want to call them, and pick out the largest number. So for each of those subarrays, we're going to pick out the largest number for each, and then store that in another array. And then return that array from the function. So we're going to be returning an array that is essentially a list of the largest numbers in each of those subarrays. Okay, so for example, if we take this array, we look at the first subarray, we'll see that 5 is the largest number. So we'll take that out or we'll copy that out and put it into a different array, and then move on to the next one. We'll see that 26 or 27 is the largest number, so we'll take that one out. And so we're going to build up a separate list of the largest numbers like that. And we're going to store that list of largest numbers in an array and then return that array. Okay. So for this one, the most straightforward way to iterate through an array of arrays. So if you can imagine, if you want to iterate through an array, just a standard array, we'd use a for loop. All right. Now, if we've got an array of arrays, okay, we get a for loop to iterate over the outer array. And then within that for loop, we're going to create a nested inner for loop, which is going to iterate over each element of the subarrays. Okay, so I'm going to just write down some comments here, just some pseudocode, just to help us to kind of break out the problem and visualize the problem. So, for example, here I'm going to say for loop to iterate over outer array, and inside that we're going to need, let's say, nested for loop to iterate over the subarrays. Okay, so that's nested for loop is going to be within the other for loop, right? Okay, so we've got those two. We need those two loops. We're also going to need another array that we create, which is going to store the results. Okay, so this will be an array to store the largest number results. Okay, and this will be ultimately returned from the function. So yeah, we can put another comment down here just to remind us to return array of largest numbers. Okay. So far we've got an array to store the largest numbers, which will then be returned from the function. We know that we need to access the data within this array. So we're going to need some for loops. We're going to have a for loop to iterate over the outer array, and then a nested for loop to go through each of the subarrays. Okay, so yeah, I'm actually going to just start coding a bit of this just to get started on it, and then I'll move on. Once I just get this sort of skeleton to the algorithm, this kind of structure to the algorithm coded, I'll move on into even further details. So let's first just code up a bit of this algorithm. At least it's the structure to it. So the results array will be here for this will be actually call this largest number results. Okay, and this is a constant. I mean, for this, like for a constant variable, the values inside the array can change, but what's not going to change is the actual array itself. So that's, when you see constant and you think, does that mean this array is just going to stay as an empty array forever? Well, that's not the case. The variable is actually pointing to the array, right? So the array itself stays constant, but the data inside the array is able to change. Okay, so let's have that there, and here we'll create the outer for loop. I want to remember to keep this comment inside the for loop, so I know to come back to that in a moment. Right, so for this for loop, okay, so this one's just a standard for loop. So you're going to have, we'll start with index I at 0, and we're going to go until the length of the array that we're iterating. So this, we're going to be iterating over the array, that outer array, which is passed into the function, this or variable. And just fix that, put a semicolon instead of comma. And then we're going to do we're just going to increment the index by 1 each time. So standard stuff for iterating over an array. So now we have some structure built up to the algorithm. We need to think about some further details now to this. So we want to get into whenever we get into the actual we get into the first for loop, we then need to have some tracking variable for what is the largest number in this particular subarray. Okay, so if you can imagine, for each time that we iterate over this outer for loop, we're going to now have access to one particular subarray. Okay, and we want to track the largest number of that subarray. So first things first, we're going to create a variable here, largest number, and so you can usually we might initialize variables as 0 here, but in this case, I know it's going to be at least one of the values within this array. So I'm actually going to initialize it as the first element within this subarray. Okay, so the way I access, so to give you just to hold pause there for a moment. So let's say, for example, on the first iteration of this outer for loop, we're going to be accessing this subarray here with 4, 5, 1 3 inside it, okay? So the way that we access that particular element, that particular subarray, we're gonna it's the standard code that we just have the square brackets and we pass in the index that we're at. That will give us that subarray, that particular subarray. But then how do we further access the values within that subarray? So this here is going to give me the subarray itself, but really I'm interested in the elements inside that subarray, right? I'm interested in the 4, 5, 1, 3. So to do that, so first we get the subarray with this here, but then we just go further. We add another square bracket and we pass in the index 0 to start with the first element. So the index 0 element at index 0 would be 4 for this first subarray, right? So if you can imagine, this first square bracket is giving us the element in the outer array, and then since that element is going to be an array itself, we have another square bracket which is accessing the element at index 0 in the subarray. Okay, so that's going to give us the value of our first element, which will be 4 in this case. So we initialize the largest number as the first element of this subarray. Okay, and so now we're going to need a nested for loop to iterate over the subarray. So actually, just to clarify this, it's going to be this nested for loop is going to iterate over the subarray elements, right? So the outer for loop iterates over the outer array's element. Then now within here, we're going to have a nested for loop to iterate over the subarray elements, okay? And when we're in there, we're going to want to check we're going to get to inside this for loop, we're going to have a condition. So this is where we're going to be checking. We're going to go through each element and we're going to check if is this current element larger than this largest number, right? So largest number starts as the element at index 0, and in the nested for loop, we're going to iterate over the remaining elements and check if any of those remaining elements are larger. If they are, we're going to update largest number with whatever larger number we come across, right? So we'll say nested for loop, and then here, if the current number is larger than, just copy this, larger than largest number. So if we find that any of the current numbers are larger, then we're going to update larger number. Okay, and yeah, so let's move on to this, but let's code this out. So create a for loop here, and I can't say I want an index variable again, but I can't use I in this case because we're going to be confusing ourselves with the index I of the outer loop. So I'm just going to use J here to be something different, and instead of the usual usually starting at index 0, I'm actually going to skip index 0 and start at index 1. The reason for that is because, well, the largest number is already initialized as that number at index 0, so there's no point in checking it again, right? We can just skip that one, go on to index 1. So we'll start this loop at index 1, right? And the usual again. So then we got to lie until j is less than array, and instead of, as before we'd said array.length, but this is actually going to be the length of the outer array. Whereas I'm actually looking for the length of the subarray. So same as how we access the subarray up above here, where we use the we can access it like this. We want to get whatever this element is in that array. So I'm going to go here and put that in. So here, just to clarify that then, so this is the array.length. This is going to give me the length of the outer array. Whereas in this case, I'm taking the array, the subarray at this index, and I'm checking the length of that subarray. Okay. So now, and then again, just increment the index by 1 each time. Right, so let's get this. Let's move the comments back inside so I know what I'm doing. And okay, so now I know that the next part of the algorithm then is I want to have an if condition here where I'm checking if the current number is larger than, well, yeah, the current number that we're iterating over is larger than the current value of largest number, right? So to code that, so as you can imagine, I'm going to need a if statement here, and the condition will be so I want to get the current number. So as we've seen before, up here we saw that if I want to access the data in a subarray, I first need to get, for the first square brackets, I'm accessing the subarray itself, and then the second square brackets, I'm accessing the particular elements in the subarray. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to be using the index j for the second square bracket, right? So what we're going to have here, like this, the index I is following the outer for loop, right? So that's going to stay with the subarray, and we're going to start from each subarray, and then the nested subloop, the nested for loop, we're going to have index j, which is going to go, it's going to go along the elements within the subarray, right? So that's, this here is going to give me whatever is the current element of the depending on what number of iterations we've done in the for loop. That's going to get, so let's just take an example, right, just to clarify it. Okay, so let's just say we run this function first time. The outer for loop is going to start at index 0, so it's going to grab the subarray at index 0. Okay, then when we move into the inner for loop, so this I here will be 0, so it's going to give us the first subarray, which is this one, and then index j starts at 1, so this will be 1 for the first iteration, which will skip 4. 4 is 0, so we're going to go to number 5, right? And then as it completes this nested for loop, it's going to move on. J will increment to 2, which will give us the 1, and then finally the next iteration of the nested for loop will give us 3, and then whenever that finishes, then we go back to a new iteration of the outer for loop, right, which will move us on to the next subarray. Okay, that's how I was going to work through it. So for here, we're just going to check current number, and we're just checking if the current number is greater than the largest number. And if we find a condition where it is, so let's say So take for example, we're iterating over the first subarray. Up here, largest number will be initialized as 4, right? The the value at index 0 of the subarray. And when we're iterating over the nested loop, it's going to be comparing the current number, which would be 5, with the current value in largest number, which would be 4, right? So 5 is greater than 4. So in this case, it's going to actually come in and update largest number. And so to update largest number, so we're going to assign it a new value right here, and the new value is going to be that current number, right? So you have that there. So let me take away these comments just to make the code a little clearer, and right. Okay, so you can see here we got the outer for loop, and then there's the largest number value here, just to track the largest number. Then we iterate over the subarray with the nested for loop, and for each of those values, we're going to just go one by one through the subarray, and in the end, we're going to have the largest number is going to be stored in this variable. Okay, and so then there's one more thing we want to do. So we're going to have the largest number in this variable, but if we don't do anything else and we just iterate back around this for loop, largest number is going to be reassigned with element 0 in the next subarray. Okay, so we're going to lose the largest number. So we need to store that whenever we process a subarray and we get the largest number, we need to actually store that somewhere else, and that's where this largest number results array comes in, right? So we're going to actually store the largest numbers in that subarray. So we're going to be accessing the subarray with the index I. So yeah, we're going to be using index I because we want the largest number that's going to be representing each subarray, right? So each subarray will be represented by the largest number of that array. Okay, so in this case, we'll have a new array, and for the first round, we'll have 5 in there, and yeah, so on. It'll be 27 next, and yeah, 30, 39 after that, right, and so on. So we're accessing the largest number of results here and store the largest number in there. So now we have, with this, we're actually building up an array of those largest numbers. Okay, and that seems to be the most of the algorithm there. Just need to remember to actually return that largest number of results array. And then I just want to remove some spaces just to make the code a bit easier to read. And let's see, run these tests. Yeah, so that's all good. Just to recap then on the code. So we're going to take in a largest of this, an array like this will be an array of subarrays. So this will be the first subarray example here, and we're going to have an outer for loop to iterate through each subarray, and then as we go through each subarray, we'll have a nested for loop to iterate through the numbers within that particular subarray. And the whole point of doing that is we want to come up with this largest number value that's going to be the largest number of that subarray. And when we do that, we're going to build up we have a separate array, which is just going to be storing the results for largest number. And yeah, so then when we finished processing those for loops, we just return that array of largest number results from the function. And yeah, so hope that's all clear, and